Hey everyone, Chris Sawyer here. The Varietal Show is back. I am sitting here in Alexander Valley, the great county of Sonoma. We are sitting here enjoying ourselves. This is my great friend Miro. He is an extraordinary winemaker, and you can say he's even got a brand named after him, Miro, indeed. Miro and I have been friends for 2 decades or so. We are at Trentadue Winery right here in Alexander Valley. This is right between the little towns of Healdsburg and Geyserville. We're really pretty much the middle ground between the two. This has got a whole history behind it, and we're going to go into that in a few minutes. We're going to taste a few of the wines from Trentadue that Miro makes. But Miro himself is not from the United States. He was not born here. He was born in a very special place on the face of the planet, and he came here originally to work for Dry Creek Vineyard, and which is right over the hill in Dry Creek Valley. How Miro and I know each other so well, besides me being a fan of his and in the great kinds of wines that he makes, is just that we judge a lot of wine competitions together too, and just getting to know each other's palates. We just judged a recent one, which is the North Coast Wine Challenge, which was fantastic. We were on the same team, which is always fun. And, it's one of those things, it's kind of hard for winemakers sometimes, in my opinion, to be a judge of other people's wines, because sometimes they just say, I would never have made that, and it kind of is judgmental. Miro has a palate that is a consumer-based palate, and he likes good wine, just like me, and just like you guys. And that's why I love Miro. So, Miro, tell us a little bit about the country that you come from. Bulgaria.
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, everyone. Everyone say it once. Bulgaria!
Well, cheers. Thanks
Cheers.
for coming.
Absolutely. What brought you here from Bulgaria?
Well, let's see. Opportunity, but first of all, it was actually a legitimate exchange program in the wine business. So I'm not a economic fugitive, if you will. So I was just graduating my viticulture, actually agronomy in a university with an agronomy degree in specializing in viticulture, and we, at the time, the communism was failing or have fallen in 1989. So in 1990, we were invited to come to the United States and do an exchange program for 7 of us. It was managed by Future Farmers of America, which is kind of funny. Yeah. So 7 of us made it, and it was a big ordeal because everybody, the whole university, wanted to go, and their requirements were pretty simple in the ways. They all wanted us to be males, no older than 24, and no lighter than 136 pounds. Those are,
Where'd the petrol thing come in?
Well, but
maybe
it
the
just
airplane sometimes.
Yeah, it was crazy. We had to devise how do we screen out 500-600 people eligible bachelors at the time, because they also they didn't say that anyway. So I made it, and I came all the way to California. Most of my friends stayed on the East Coast in various different agricultural occupations. I wanted to be in a winery, and that was my first placement. We had a choice of 3 placements, and my first one was in a winery. So so Dry Creek was my host, Dry Creek Winery, but they couldn't take me as early as June. It's way too early for harvest. So I spent about a month and a half, almost 2 months in Napa with another colleague of mine who used to work at Sterling at the time. And they were generous enough to host me, and there was all kinds of funny stories that happened.
I bet. I want to hear those later, though. We don't have enough time now.
Yeah, so I came to Dry Creek, and I started as an intern, and then some really strange, peculiar circumstances. I ended up completing my entire 18 months of exchange instead of going to 2 other 6-month segments and some other agricultural occupations. I stayed the entire time at Dry Creek, and end up staying in this country, which is a different story. But I was so I started as an intern, ended up to be a cellar master, and then assistant winemaker, 9 years So the whole
It's pretty good stuff, you guys. And
it was 9 years with Dry Creek. I met a lot of wonderful people. Kind of learned, the ropes there and who is who, and it was just a beautiful experience. And it still is. This community here it's incredible.
Yeah.
Still pretty close, although the competition is kind of
it's building a little bit. Yeah. But here we are. We're at Trentadue Winery too. This is a very interesting story, you guys. Anyone out there that knows the brand Ridge? Ridge is a great brand, and it's the original Ridge Winery is located down in it's kind of basically looking over Silicon Valley from the mountains, Santa Cruz Mountains. The interesting story about the Trentadue family is they sold the property to the Ridge, the original Ridge founders there above Silicon Valley, and they took the money from their property and brought it here to Alexander Valley and purchased this great piece of land right between Geyserville and Healdsburg. Eventually, it turned out that Ridge in 1966, I believe, was their first bottling of the wine that you see a lot in probably one of the most famous ones that they're known for. We all know Montebello is from down there, which is a Cabernet. But their first real big Zinfandel hit was Geyserville. Guess where they got that fruit? From this property. Yep. So the Trentadues sold them the property down there in the South Bay, purchased this property here, and then Ridge started buying from them. And that's pretty much how it goes back to 1966. And that vineyard is right outside this window here. Yep. So if you ever taste the Geyserville designate, it's actually not from their property, which is about a mile that way. The Ridge Linton Springs is about a mile that way, but they get it from the Trentadues, and here we are at their place.
Well, you probably don't know the other fact, but about 5 years or 6 years ago, the Trentadue family finally sold that original piece that Ridge Geyserville started from.
Yep.
So now it's their property.
Yep. Now it is. Yep.
After many years, they tried to purchase it, and I'm not sure what happened 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
But the Trentadue family said, "Okay, we'll sell it to you."
Probably just every year saying, we still want to buy it. Just by the way, FYI.
Ever since I started at Trentadue, I remember they used to call me in the house in January and ask me, "We have an offer from Ridge to buy that piece there." I said, "Well, what are you asking me? I mean, I can use the money, but it's your land. I mean, I can spend whatever money I can give you from it, the sale." Yeah. So Ridge used to buy more grapes from here. Yeah. And when I started here about 23 years ago, we started using more and more of our estate fruit for our own wines. Yeah. So Ridge right now, besides that property which is theirs, they buy a little bit of Carignan from here and a little bit of Zinfandel. Yeah, so that's a good way to start off, just so you know where we're at kind of here, because Dry Creek Valley is right there, pretty much less than a mile across the street or across the freeway from us here. We are in Alexander Valley. We're looking out at the big widespread Alexander Valley here. But the first wine we're tasting is not from Alexander Valley. This is from Mendocino County, which is just, seriously, we're talking about 10 miles north of here is where the border is. And that's just above Cloverdale, the next big town. But this is actually your own brand, and I've been buying this ever since he started releasing this. It depends on which wine program I'm buying for, but this is one of my favorites of them all, and this is the Sasha Cuvée, and this is named after your daughter, Alexandra. She's 20 now.
The middle name, right, is Sasha?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And so this is a blend of 78% Grenache and 22% Sirah from up in, Mendocino County.
It's right on the Lake Sonoma. Lake Mendocino.
Lake Mendocino.
Right on the shore of Lake Mendocino, tiny little vineyard.
So up on their Talmadge bench is kind of that area that we call it. There's a Talmadge bench, and then there's Redwood Valley, and it's kind of like circling right around that area.
So this wine recently was awarded 100 points, perfect score from LA International, which both of us judge. And it was one of 3 wines out of, 2,200. Yeah. And it's also scored pretty well in some of these other ones as well, best in class and on and on. I've been making Miro this is actually the 20th vintage. And it seems
your daughter is how old?
20.
20.
It seems like it's yesterday when we started it, but man, the time flies.
I know.
So I just love these kind of wines. I always like the style, Rowan style. I mean, these are the wines that you don't need Encyclopedia Britannica to appreciate what they are. And they drink fantastically with any kind of food, just about, or just on their own. I mean,
I think that for me, the Rhones are really about food. I mean, it's so wonderful. We refer to a lot of them as GSM, which means a Grenache Syrah, and Mourvedre. There's no Mourvedre in this one, but you've done it with Mourvedre in the past. But you know what I like about it is it does have a silky texture. It's much more like a Pinot Noir in a lot of cases for Grenache. It has a big body, but it's rounder, smoother, and the Syrah is kind of that element in the back, that little bit of structure in the back, and it's just so good with food. Every time I put it on by the glass in restaurants, I call him up, and he's like, "Oh, sorry, dude, we're sold out now." I'm like, "Ah." You know, but because it just, once people fall in love with it, they fall in love with it, and it's gone. So, you know, so if you need some of this is mirocellars.com. You can find that. And it's a good setup, because now let's go to some of the other award-winning wines from here. And I've got the little date bucket somewhere here. I don't know. Well, I might have to down it, but this next wine that we've got is the Cuvée. And I'll tell you right now, this is a 2020 vintage. And this is Cuvée 32 from Trentadue. And I'm going to bring you right here. La Storia Cuvée 32. This is the red blend, and it is 31% Sangiovese, 27% Montepulciano. Say that at home. Montepulciano. It just makes you feel good. Just like saying Sangiovese. You see, we're way beyond Chianti, which was easy to say. 23% of this is also Malbec. We've got 16% Syrah, 2% Zinfandel, and 1% Merlot, which actually does make a difference.
Huge.
You know, Merlot is actually one of those great grapes. We weren't going to taste it, but he makes some extraordinarily good Merlot that comes up in very highly ranked in competitions. I will say this too, just, you know, on behalf of him, and another Bulgarian that we love so much is Nadia, our friend Nadia from down. Last time I was here was with Nadia after we judged the San Francisco wine competition. She is also Bulgarian, and cheers to her. We always love her. You're the one that introduced me to her. But the thing is here, there's also an Italian thing. You hear Trentadue. I mean, come on. You know, you just want some Italian food with it. You know, so the Sangiovese Montepulciano blend here is really unique, and you just don't find enough great Sangioveses and Montepulcianos from America, in my opinion, and there's reasons for that. We're not the Mediterranean, even though we get compared to Mediterranean climates and conditions and stuff. Our soils are very different here, and we're still young versus Italy as a nation and as a wine regions. So, but this is really delicious, and this did extremely well at our recent one, which is the North Coast Wine Challenge. This is one of the top red wines of them all. So I think this is really something that's going to be special for other people to taste. And I've always enjoyed the Cuvée 32. Why is it called La Storia, and why is it called Cuvée 32?
Again, long story short, but when I started Trentadue 23 years ago, I got lucky in my first vintage was 1999, and if you remember, it was a great year.
Yep.
So all the wines turned spectacular, and the marketing team got really, really excited, and they started coming up with all kinds of ideas. And at the time, I guess Trentadue was not at the great standing at the moment, so we said, okay, instead of coming with, you know, Trentadue Reserve or this and that, let's come up with a different proprietary name. Yeah. So we picked, I think it was more than a dozen, at least, Italian-sounding names that were not trademarked at the time. So La Storia, I love La Storia because it means the story, the history, it's a great conversational piece, what it means. What means the story of the Trentadue family. Leo wasn't very happy about it because, well, how do people know it's Trentadue? Well, it says it on the back very small, but then we added in the front, it says by Trentadue.
By Trentadue.
So this was our
lot of information on that.
This was our reserve line of wines back then. Very small production. And they had Sangiovese here planted. Now it's almost 60 years ago when they planted it, and the vineyard is still here. And it was really hard. I don't know if you remember, but the whole California went through this Cal Italia period.
It was good. There was some really good stuff. I mean, I'll give some good credits to like Vino Noceto up in the Sierra foothills, and you know, some really good ones. There's a few good ones here in Northern California, but it's not like, you know, the Antinoris came over here and they from Italy. They tried a really great big project, and it was a failure. And so it's not the same. It's just different, and you have to have the right clones, and they have to be put in the right place. For Sangiovese, Montepulciano is something I give Greg Graziano up in Mendocino some credit for that, bringing Montepulciano and other people like that.
Well, this was actually, it was kind of that particular blend, the Cuvée 32, was more born out of necessity, if you will, because we had a hard time selling Sangiovese on its own, and I was, I guess, desperate enough to look and see what they've done in Tuscany to uplift the image of Sangiovese, not just being cheap Chianti, but it's more to it. So I said, well, let's super Tuscan it, you know, turn it into a super Tuscan style by adding some other varieties to it. At the time, we didn't have Montepulciano, but Victor went to Tuscany with his wife, and they traveled around Italy as well. And he came back and started talking, and says, you know, I wish I remember this variety, but they serve it in a lot of these restaurants from behind, you know, and then it comes into a pitcher or carafe or something, not in a bottled label state.
It was just yummy.
And he loved it. It was dark, it was beautiful, it was so drinkable. So I started guessing what could have been, and at some point I said Montepulciano, and Victor said, yes, that's the one. So we found some cuttings, and we T-butted 4 rows, 2 of Merlot and 2 of Zinfandel. 2 of them were head pruned, the other ones on a wire to see what's going to happen. And we loved it.
Wow.
And then we ended up searching and finding a certified Italian clone of, I forgot the number exactly, I think it was clone 4, Montepulciano, and we planted 1.7 acres about 12 years ago. And we just about doubled the entire production of Sonoma County, planted 1.75 acres, because Mick Unti has...
Mick does. There's more. There's
not much.
Not that much. But this is just a delicious wine, and it's very easy to see why our great judges that were together a couple weeks ago really love this wine and why it ranks so well. This is a 2020 vintage of the Cuvée 32. One of my favorite things on the back label is it just says Product des États-Unis. États-Unis, you know, so into the United States you got.
This is Canadian export.
So it's Canadian export. So you got to say
we have to have the French.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
they're very, very strict about it. And I also have to say the sulfites in French too, which is almost the same as English, but
those Canadians, they go to all these things that they're sticklers for.
Yeah.
But I love them too.
What do you have now?
So this is the 2021 Zinfandel. So one thing that both Miro and I are very involved in, and this is the new Trentadue Zinfandel, the 2021. Great marker there for that. It's the Storia, so it's a little bit higher end than the regular Trentadue, even though we do make some under that label too. But this is a really special one, another one that ranks super high up there, gold medal winning. But probably something that is very dear to our hearts is the ZAP organization, Zinfandel Advocates and Producers. We support you 100%, and I hope you guys love Zinfandel. Many of them out there that are my great listeners know exactly what. Here's to Zin. And here's to California's state grape. You're right, John, right on. This really happened back in the 1850s when it really became something here to start growing grapes on a more of a commercial kind of lineage at that point, because the gold rush, I mean, it brought a lot of people here from all over the world that just wanted to make it big, and there wasn't really the grapes growing. They were not indigenous here. The ones that were here were the mission grapes brought up by the missionaries and little plantings here and there. But Zinfandel became the grape of California. And today we have so many great producers that are preserving these amazing vineyards. And we've got one like we were just talking about with Ridge's property right here. And we've got people like the Bialy family, Robert Bialy, doing everything they can in Turley and Napa Valley to save these grapes. And Chase Cellars is another great one from Napa Valley and Brown Estate. And so we have those, but here in Sonoma County, we still have a lot of room where we still have these old vines that are still alive. And man, we've got some right out here, right out our window. This is something that's really passionate for you. And tell us a little bit about this one. It can also be a difficult grape to make wine with. So there's one reason that I will always say this, and I think some of you that watch this show know this. My two favorite grapes of them all are Pinot Noir and Zinfandel. Mostly because they're the most difficult wines to make of them all. Cabernet is easy to farm. It's easy to do anything with. It grows like the clusters they're super easy. Pinot Noir can be unforgiving. It takes every step. If you mess up, it's not going to be that good. Zinfandel, it's just a perky little creature that has outlived human beings and generations of human beings, and the clusters are interesting. You look at a cluster, the middle of it is completely ripe, the top of it's pruning, and the bottom might not even be red yet, and it's still green. And so what do? In the old days, we used to just pick it once everything was ripe, and then everything was porty. But today, there's a lot more balance and a lot about just knowing your vineyards, and especially when you control your own destiny and you own your vineyards, life is much better.
Zinfandel is, I don't know if I can say it on camera, but I've heard a lot of Pinot winemakers that put their hands on Zinfandel. They weren't very nice to it, meaning it's difficult, especially the fermentation. Where Pinot, once you do the hard job in the vineyard and bring it to the winery, it actually ferments almost without any issues. You might say it ferments too fast, so you got to slow it down. Whereas Zinfandel can do anything just to piss you off. It's just incredible. And more to the story, when I was studying in Bulgaria, I thought I knew everything about the world wine grapes. Zinfandel was not in our ampelography books, and so was not Petite Sirah. The closest thing to Zinfandel was actually mentioning a Primitivo as commercially insignificant variety from Puglia. That was it. So when I came to California, Zinfandel to me was unknown, and I thought I'd skip a class if I missed that part. And on top of that, later I became so enchanted by it that I've been on the board of directors of ZAP for more than a decade. And I also was one of the founders of another organization called PS I Love You.
PS I Love You. We'll talk about that in a minute.
So those two varieties were, to me, they were epitome of California. They are what made California different than any other wine growing regions in the world. It's just these two varieties. Although they all came from Europe, but they are very Californian.
Now let's just take 1 second too to also talk about Zinfandel and how we know where it came from now, and that is Croatia. Let's give some super credits to Carol Meredith, one of our great professors at University of California, Davis, who solved this mystery for us. And it actually has to do with another great ZAP member, which is Mike Gergich, who just turned 100 years old. You want to know how to save, how to live longer? Drink fine wines, you guys. This is like Mike Gergich is the epitome of like living beyond expectations. He's our little Benjamin Button for many people out there. But he also knew when he came from Croatia, he knew from the minute he started working with Lee Stewart back in the 1950s that up on the hill, this vines that he was picking grapes from reminded him of something at home. And he eventually got Carol Meredith involved with the great professors in Zagreb in Croatia, and sure enough, he was right on. I mean, this DNA completely links to vines. There's old mother vines there in Croatia that are the same exact DNA as what we have here in America. It came through, different steps that happened because of Massachusetts. We know it's traced back there in the 1820s, and it came here in the 1850s too. But the thing is, it's still alive, and many of these vines are like from the 1880s that have outlived a lot of human beings. Okay?
The oldest ones here that are now on the Rich property, they're 1896. They were planted in 1896. Then we have a couple other blocks that were planted in the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah, and then there's, and also just overall, the oldest ones that I know are 1869 up in the Grand Père vineyard up in the Sirah foothills, right by where the mines were.
Yeah. It is amazing. When they get that old, especially in the winter, they look like a fossil. They look fossilized.
Yeah.
And then the spring comes in and they come back to life. Year again, yeah.
And they're not the pretty vines that everyone
No.
is exactly the
No.
same. They all look like this. They all model the same. They're gnarly. They've been
Moss
abused.
growing.
They've been abused by Mother Nature for years, for like centuries in some cases.
It's a long time.
And if they could tell stories about humans, they would, but they can't. So we just have to put them into perspective when we drink them, and to say, give support to them, because they are amazing vines that have outlived generations of people.
And on top of that, makes delicious wine.
Yes.
And it's also, the Zinfandel adapted California really, really well, kind of
Yeah.
morph into different appellations. And it represents some spectacular in some ways. You can tell that this is Alexander Valley, or it's the Russian River,
Yeah.
or it's Napa, or Sierra Foothills, or on and on. And it's, but you know, in order to make good wine, you have to kind of push the grapes hard. And once you do that, you're risking the sugars to go high. And that's when that's what those Zinfandel makers we're really hard headed. We kind of cross our fingers and fight the battle every year. And it's very temperamental. I mean, it's not for for beginners.
But what I love about this is it has a character that's all its own. It's almost every single one of them you'll ever taste, if they're done right and they're from old vines. They have a wild berry kind of flavor to them. But this one has a really great plum note to it, and also some really nice touches of like kind of a black fig kind of note. And you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. And we are not that far from the Russian River here. And you like, these are like the kinds of things that you would plant near the rivers, is figs. And I really want a fig right now with a little bit of blue cheese and this.
have a lot of figs
maybe
around.
wrapped in prosciutto and stuff, and like have this. We'd be happy right now.
The soils here are definitely gravelly. They're very deep, very well drained.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. I mean,
It's great.
Yeah.
But here to ZAP and the great organization, and we love supporting them in any way we can. Here at Gravenstein Grill, we're going to be doing more events with them. You know, every year we do, and I love being down wherever their big events are. I love being a part of them, and you know, telling my stories about my love for Zinfandel, which I grew up with off the Russian River too. So moving on to one other great grape variety that's kind of unsung in many ways. We could be talking all we want about Cabernet Sauvignon from Alexander Valley, and we'll do another show based on that. But we don't need to right now, because Cabernet is great, but when I think about summertime, and I think about where we're at in springtime, and when I think about going into the winter time and the fall, especially more fall, I think about barbecue, and I think about things like that, and I think about really fun things where you just have a bunch of people together. You don't need to have like a super formal dinner, and it doesn't need to be all sit down. It's not about holiday. It's about just sharing good things. Petite Sirah is one of those great grapes too that really came into being, and one of the reasons is it became the second coming of Zinfandel. So if you think about what was really happening there with the gold miners back there in the old days, in the 1850s, a lot of them said, you know what, I don't want to go down in this coal mine or these gold mines anymore. I just want to actually make a little business and sell to the people to get the money from there. And then, you know, let's just do this. My family was known for growing grapes and all these kinds of things. We needed a second grape to come in to be the support system. We have no real research, enough of it hadn't been developed yet, you know, like UC Davis and at the time UC Berkeley was doing. But we knew one thing, that this other grape, Petite Sirah, was going to be a hardy grape that we could help define California. And I feel like this is a great example. You win not only under your Miro label, but also the Trentadue label and the La Storia. What'd you just win for this new one?
3 best of class for all of those that we're talking about it, from LA International, from North Coast, from LA Invitational, so far just the last 3 for the last month.
He just makes really good Petite Sirah. So it's kind of like I know he's from Bulgaria, but he was meant to be here, you guys. That's my whole point of this whole entire show.
20 years
He was meant to be here. Now we have him, and we're keeping him. Just so you know. Petite Sirah, what's it mean to you? Why is it so different than working with Zinfandel?
Well, Petite is it's a whole different issue as far as no. I love Petite, but Petite Sirah is hard to grow because it's very sensitive to bunch rot. And thank God it doesn't rain very often in California during harvest time. But I have seen it in a few occasions where we had a little bit of a drizzle at the wrong time, and the grape just rot in front of your eyes, which is sad, very, very sad. The grapes were invented, ironically, this variety was created in France by a selectioner, I can say it was Francois Durif. And the other name for this variety is Durif, although we meaning P.S. I Love You, we changed, the Durif used to be the primary name. Yep. At TTB, but then we switched them. We asked them to switch it, at least make them synonymous with Petite Sirah, because everybody knew it as Petite Sirah. Very few people knew it as Durif, even in France. So when the variety was, it was a cross between Syrah and Pelorsan, which is another indigenous variety from southern France. And so the selectioner, Mr. Durif, was trying to increase the resistance of Syrah to powdery mildew, which is a very common disease. Yeah. And you can argue somewhat Petite Sirahs are more resistant to powdery mildew, but it's extremely sensitive to bunch rot, which is equally devastating. So the clusters are smaller than Syrah, the berries are much tighter, close together, they hold moisture, and that's devastating when it comes to fungal diseases, and the skins are thinner. But Petite Sirah inherit the best features out of Syrah, and I'm not sure about Pelorsan because it's a very obscure variety. We might have some around here.
We do have a few examples, and the only ones that I really know is at Stag Sleep Winery, on your entrance into Stag Sleep Winery. But, Dr. Durif was an interesting man. He went to the north, where northern Rhone Valley, where he got the Syrah cuttings, and then he went down to basically the French Riviera, where Pelorsan came from, took these two things, crossed them together, and created this super grape. So people say, like, what, is it? Well, that's the first thing that's different about it and Syrah, is that it's got a little part of cross in there. But when Dr. Durif went back to those two regions and said, I've got the greatest thing ever, that I took a little part from yours and a little bit from theirs, and they didn't like each other. Those regions did not like each other. And so there was a problem here. So it was kind of like an outcast. But the one thing it really did have is that durability and that bigger kind of body and texture and roundness.
It's like a money in the bank. If you have a challenging harvest, meaning the grapes are not so ripe or the colors are not there, Petite Sirah will come to the rescue and fix everything. And it's a much better blender than Syrah is, because Syrah can overpower any kind of other variety if you go over 15% for sure. Where Petite Sirah, like I said, inherit only the best out of Syrah, which is the blueberries, the color, the tannin, all that stuff. And none of the negatives that Syrah can have, which is the meatiness and the greeniness and all that. And Petite Sirah is a lot more consistent and reliable as far as what will deliver. Of course, it does better in the area that we are in, but it will do just fine in Lodi or Central Valley or whatever. Or it's more complex here.
St. Helena in Napa Valley might be one of the better regions, but no one knows it because Napa Valley is just associated with big cabs and all this kind of stuff. But if you really look at it, it's really one of the best areas that there is. And
historically, there used to be...
Give Bialy some creds for that one,
way more Petite Sirah planted in Napa Valley up to the 60s, late 60s, than the Cabernet. Yeah. And then eventually Cabernet took over. But
correct.
So the bottom line is, everybody wants to have Petite Sirah, but the growing part of it is tricky because at first the vines get virus at some point, and also if it rains on it, it's not going to survive very well. But once you bring it to the winery, it's so much fun. It doesn't surprise you at all with the fermentations.
It's not like the Zin that's gonna pull your hair out of your head. Go figure.
But the two are actually meant to go together. And we in the cellar, we all know that probably one of the best wines we can make is some sort of a almost equal blend of Zinfandel and Petite Sirah. And in this small place like Trentadue, I've insisted on making a blend, 50-50 Petite Sirah and Zinfandel. It's fantastic. It's called Storia Cuvée Nicole,
Yeah.
named after one of the grandchildren. And it's 150 cases, only goes to our club, but it's fantastic. So it gets the best of Zin, the best of Petite Sirah. So the color, the beauty, just beautiful stuff.
It's one of my favorites. And I'll say one thing too, just as far as age worthiness. There's something unique that I've found through the years, 30 plus years of being a sommelier and being a wine writer and everything, that really keeps reminding me about Cab and Petite Sirah and what they have in common. They're both crosses. Yeah, they are. And sometimes that's such a good thing because it actually creates these kinds of things that are really good for aging. And those are two very good examples instead of being just one variety that we know exactly where it came from. And it's, this is kind of more of a cross of things that has acid, it has different levels of acid that get put together. And I feel like Petite Sirahs, if you really buy cases of them, that's a good thing because you can enjoy them when they're young, but you can also put them away and they're really, really interesting. And I have a whole section in my cellar, believe me, of Petite Sirahs. I won't even touch them for another 10 years at least because they're going to be fun. Yeah. So I think this is a great example, and you win almost every competition. You're getting golds with this one. Or your
people ask me.
Miro brand. Yep.
I have Miro Petite Sirah, which is from Dry Creek, and it's incredible.
Really
dry farm wine. People asking me, how do I make the Petite Sirah so drinkable? Because in the old days, they fermented Petite Sirah just like Cabernet, so heavy pump overs and on and on. The tannins that come out of Petite Sirah can be so unforgiving that you have to age it for 20, 30 years before you even touch it. Yeah. So for being such a big and burly wine, and in general, I can say that I do make it sort of like a Pinot Noir.
Yeah, it can be,
carefully.
The way he makes it is generous. Like, it wants to give you a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially for most consumers who basically purchase to drink and not really putting it in the cellar. So there's both sides to this, and I think that your Miro one is particularly good for just like, man, that's just yummy right out of the bat.
So I think the French are finally they're getting back into rediscovering Petite Sirah. I don't know if they told you the story. In 2019, me and Victor hosted Trentadue hosted a cruise ship on Loire River. And when we were in Hermitage, we hired a local sommelier to show us around. We didn't tell him that we're in the wine business until we kind of have to. So at some point he said, while we were sitting on top and he was pinpointing all these famous vineyards, he said that they actually been working for 5 years. This is back in 2019, of reintroducing Petite Sirah back to Hermitage because global warming made the climate a bit too warm for the Syrah that they make, for the style of Syrah. So they try to see if Petite Sirah can do better, because Petite Sirah, we know it likes heat or tolerates heat much better than Syrah does. So at that point we told them, all right, back off now. You didn't like the Petite Sirah back then because it wasn't regal enough for you. You chased it out of France and came to California, and now you want it back. He goes, oh, wait a minute, you guys are in the wine business. Oh, okay, well, let's stop.
Just saying. Just saying. Yeah.
So that's
one organization too that I'll give some credits to is the Rhone Rangers organization, and they did a great job by involving Petite Sirah in that category, because there are very defined things from the Rhone Valley about the whites and the reds, but because it is part Syrah and that it came over here, they accepted it, and it's helped, I think, the Rhone Valley get to know it better.